Ape Escape is one of those franchises that seems to have been forgotten about over the years. Despite having loads of spin-offs and sequels, I feel like I rarely hear about this series. The early 2000s were filled with all kinds of platformers that fell below the radar. Things like Ty the Tasmanian Tiger or even Pac-Man World were good games, but didn't necessarily catch on as well as something like Ratchet and Clank. In a weird way, the Ape Escape franchise feels a little different. Sure, it was moderately successful, but the third game in the series was the last major release, and that was all the way back in 2006, almost 20 years ago now. I have a feeling that Sony themselves have a soft spot for the franchise, as even to this day they're constantly referencing it in major first-party releases. So, what happened? The first game was developed by Sony Computer Entertainment Japan and was released worldwide in 1999. I didn't know this until recently, but it was also the first game released that required the use of Sony's DualShock controller. If you don't remember, the original PlayStation controllers just had a D-pad, where the DualShock had two thumbsticks. The PlayStation was my first console growing up, but we always got things years after they released, so I've never actually seen the original controllers, but I thought this was interesting. The game was developed by a mostly inexperienced team made up of college students over the course of about 2.5 years. Despite the lack of tenured developers, the game received positive reviews overall. I never played the original game growing up, not for a lack of interest, but rather I just never heard of it until much later on. In November of 1999, Pizza Hut released a promotional demo of the game. I hadn't thought about this for years, but I miss physical media so much, just because it made it possible for these weird collaborations to exist. While I never had this demo disc from Pizza Hut, we did have others. Nothing was better than spending a Friday night at Pizza Hut and getting those demos. The whole thing was so mystical to me as a kid. I didn't know how the world worked yet, so I just assumed that restaurants also made video games at the time, which was absurd but hilarious to think about in hindsight. It might be simple, but Pizza Hut and Blockbuster really made Friday nights as a kid seem special. Speaking of, am I the only one who's been noticing the rapid decline in Pizza Hut's popularity? The ones near me don't even offer the buffets anymore, but I'm wildly off track now, so let's move on. The game was released on the PSP back in 2005 to slightly more mixed reviews, mainly due to more limited controls. Given that the PSP is much more powerful than the PS1, the game looks significantly better here and, in my opinion, is the definitive way to play if you don't mind the control changes. One thing I love about the original is that the jump button is mapped to the shoulder buttons, which was weirdly ahead of its time. Modern games have just adopted this sort of control scheme within the last 10 years, but it allows you to use the right stick and to jump around at the same time. It's pretty cool how the first game to require the DualShock was so ahead of its time in that aspect. The PSP doesn't have a second stick, so in order to jump you have to use the face button, which isn't terrible, but it's just not as fluid. Other than that, it's a pretty decent port of the game. The first time I heard of the franchise is when I got Ape Escape 2. Now, I can't exactly remember how I came to own this game, but my guess is that it was either in the value bin at a Kmart or at a yard sale. This is primarily how we got our games growing up, and a lot of the times you'd just pick out something that looked fun. It was kind of like gambling. You'd roll the dice and sometimes you'd get something good, or sometimes you'd get Crazy Frog Racer. Not good. Anyway, Ape Escape 2 is the reason I wanted to make this video. It's one of my favorite games from my childhood, and I'm surprised it's not talked about more. The game was developed by the same team who made the original, and it improves pretty much everything. The graphics now look crisp and sharp, they added a ton of new gadgets to use which we'll talk about later, and the music is seriously next level. It's funny, the game itself is super addicting to play, but it's one of those games that when I think about it, the music is the first thing that pops into my head. Koji Hayama made the soundtrack to this game. If the name sounds familiar, it's because he would go on to compose music for Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. I remember starting the first level all those years ago and hearing this music for the first time. For some reason, despite its simplicity, it gets stuck in my head even to this day and I can't help but to hum it from time to time. It takes me back every time I hear it. The music for the entire game is great, so if you haven't played it before, it might be worth looking up the soundtrack. Aesthetically, the game has that early 2000s techie kind of vibe to it. I'm not sure what the exact name for this style is, but you know what I'm talking about. I feel like this was the last decade where the world as a whole had a little bit of optimism for what the future could be, and it was reflected a lot in the media at the time. From the cool gadgets to the bright colors, the world in Ape Escape 2 nails this look perfectly. Almost every level has that sunny or tropical kind of look to it, at least early on. The game does a good job mixing up these themes as you get closer to the end. I'm not going to cover every level in the game as there's quite a few to go through, but I'd like to highlight my favorites. Port Calm is the third level in the game, and it's the first level where you can swim around and capture monkeys underwater. The town itself is really charming and it seems like a great vacation spot. The very next level is my favorite of the early batch. Viva España looks like a classic town you might find in Spain. In this level, we get to use the dash hoop, which is not only incredibly fun to use, but it's super useful as well. You have to rotate the right stick rapidly to get to the max speed, and you can boost around the level or use it to get up steep slopes. This level was clearly built around this gadget, and for that reason it's incredibly fun to explore. Castle Frightmare is the first level to kinda change the vibe of the game. It's got that perfect Halloween vibe that I miss from the early 2000s. I don't know how to explain it, and maybe it's just nostalgia, but Halloween is one of those things that just seems different nowadays. Anyway, this level isn't anything crazy, but I love the look of it and it's always a joy to play through. Casino City is another level that I loved based on the theming. I remember as a kid thinking casinos were so cool because of movies like 21 or The Hangover. I can safely say they aren't nearly as exciting as I thought they'd be. Actually, nowadays it's basically just a bunch of mobile games on big screens. It's more depressing than anything, but nevertheless, I like this level. Snowball Mountain has that perfect wintry vibe to it that I've grown to love. I've mentioned this on the channel before, but I've always hated snowy levels as a kid, but nowadays I really appreciate them. The Blue Baboon has to be the poster child of that early 2000s look I've been describing in this video. These types of beach levels take me back to when all kinds of games used to look like this. The level itself is pretty cool with a little island you can go to just off the coast with a cave you can explore. The Lost World is another great level and it reminds me a lot of the first game. I love when video games incorporate the Jurassic period because it's just so fun to play through. This level looks fantastic and it's one of the best in the game. There really isn't any levels in this game that I hate, but those just happen to stand out to me more than others. Ape Escape 2 is one of the best platformers of the era. It's unique in its gameplay and it's visually charming. If you haven't played it yet, both the original and this one are readily available on the PlayStation Store, although I recommend playing the second one on PS4 if you still have one. Sadly, when booting the game on PS5, there seems to be tons of visual bugs and flickering, which is just weird and they haven't fixed it yet, which is sad. The fact that the first two games are readily available brings us to Ape Escape 3. I had gotten it on the PS2 all those years ago and remember loving it. It was a Hollywood filmmaking theme, which I thought was a great direction for the series to go into. Each level was its own movie. The problem is, I don't own a PS2 anymore and you can't buy it from the PlayStation Store. The fact that Sony seems to have so much love for the franchise gives me hope, but then again, we still don't have access to the third game. Part of why I'm making this video is to hopefully make the franchise known to people who maybe haven't heard of it. I'm still holding out hope one day that we'll get a new installment with stunning graphics or even a remastered trilogy like what they did with Jak and Daxter. Who knows what the future will hold for the series, but I'll be here for it either way. If you liked this video, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.